Thanks for joining us for episode 2 of the Marketing Trail Guide podcast, Opportunities in Crisis. I'm your host, Kevin Krusiewicz, and I'm the founder at Marketing Trail Guide, and we provide fractional marketing strategy and leadership for companies running on the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS. We kick off this season with John Whitt. John is a business owner, author, keynote speaker, and video show host as the founder of Business Whitt, a professional business coaching and training practice located in Irvine, California. John works with small businesses to improve performance and revenue growth. In our conversation, we talked about the reality of COVID-19 and how to rethink, retool, and relaunch in this challenging business environment. Without further delay, here's my interview with John Whitt. John, welcome to the show.
Kevin, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So John, you're a coach. You work with a lot of businesses. We're, I guess, in the middle, as far as we know, of this COVID crisis. Interesting time to be launching something. Interesting time to be in business. Interesting time for our economy. What's your sense right now? What have your clients been doing? How have they been shifting? And how are you working with them to help them during this shift?
Well, yeah, I think that's the topic for the day, isn't it? It's hard to say whether we're halfway through. I think we're a good ways through the hardest part. The recovery time is going to extend depending on the type of industry and the business that you're in. I think the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry, they're going to be, it's going to be hard coming back. The event industry, it's going to be a while before those guys really get back on their feet again. And I feel for them because they're the ones that are out of work and trying to figure out what to do next. I think that in my business, there's two. I think we could separate it and say, hey, we've got essential businesses and we have non-essential businesses. Mm-hmm. So the non-essential businesses, they've been hit harder. However, not all of them equally as hard. So anything that has to do with home improvements, home remodels, where you've got more face-to-face, high touch, they're in a holding pattern. They are hunkering down. They're minimizing their expenses. I mean, this is what I'm teaching my clients. Minimize your expenses, get down to zero, find out what's the absolute minimum you have to be operating on. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I say get down to zero, I mean really get down to the minimum, right? Do you really need cable television? Do you really need this? Do you really need that? Because depending on where you're at for your business and your life, this may be where you need to go. Okay. Get down to zero. If there's some extra money there and you decide you want to spend it on something, then go ahead. But get down to zero, whatever that minimum break even is. Mm-hmm. And so for that non-essential business, we're really seeing that. Also seeing, though, that in the home entertainment space, right, which is a non-essential business, right, people want that, right? So I have a client that's in that home entertainment space, and he does, internet and gaming systems and home video and that kind of thing. And, everybody's sheltered at home. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing investments being made in that particular space. People are saying, okay, I'm willing to risk having somebody come into my house and do this because this is so much more valuable. Whereas a new bathroom or new drapes or new something like that, that can be put on pause. Right? There's no big bonus there.
So people are deciding what their priorities are. They're shifting personally, their expenditures, they're shifting in their business. You talked about kind of finding what zero is. Is business development anywhere on the horizon right now? I have a lot of respect for your business development efforts and the content that you put out. And is that even a conversation right now for how do we acquire new customers or more business from existing customers? Or is it just hunker down, ride it out mode?
No, that's absolutely has to be a part of the conversation. So it's all steps, right? Step number 1, hunker down, get down to zero, get down, take care of what you have to take care of. Mm-hmm. Second step is, how do I build relationships? Because at some point we're coming out of this. Mm-hmm. I don't have an answer as to when, but at some point we're coming out of this. And how do I build relationships? Realize that the relationship building strategies today are online. Mm-hmm. They are not in networking groups. They are not in go visit and talk and chit chat and home parties that that's not available to us.
Yeah.
And so we're really learning how, and part of what I'm doing is teaching people how to develop more relationships and more engagements on social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. How do I start a conversation? How do I keep a conversation? How do I build a relationship so that when we move out of this, those opportunities exist?
Yeah. Now, there's potentially a whole generation of business owners that maybe have been late adopters, or they've outsourced online outreach and relationships to, the younger generation, and while they've been running the business or something like that. You're running a business. You've had a career. You're now at the point where you're doing your own thing, and yet I see you very active online with all kinds of content you're creating. How did you, kind of get yourself in a position where you made the decision to jump into something that at some point was novel, new, scary, unknown, didn't know how to do it? How did you do that?
All right, just go back 10 years to the last crisis. That was what we call the Great Recession. And there is opportunity in crisis. There's an opportunity to do things that you maybe couldn't have done before because of this massive shift. And in 2010, the company I worked for, it was a strategic inflection point. They elected to move to Dallas. And I'm from Southern California. My family's in Southern California, and I didn't want to move to Dallas. And then it was like, where do you want to go? Do I want to jump back into the corporate world, or do I want to do something else? And there's also been this massive shift over the last 30 years, right? The idea of 50 years and a gold watch, that doesn't exist anymore, right? So used to be you stayed in that job because that's where security was. Now, I will tell you that if you just want to make money, getting a job is a little easier because you just do what people tell you, and they pay you and they give you benefits. But if you want better security, when you learn how to run your own business, when you learn how to run your own shop, generate your own revenue, I mean, that's where security really lies. And so for me, I was 50 and like I could jump back into corporate, but I could be in the exact same position in a year or 2 years. And I looked at that and I said, if I learn how to run my own practice, then that's going to be a more secure scenario. And so that was an opportunity. Call it the accidental entrepreneur or the reluctant entrepreneur. It was, life kind of tossed me in. And I think a lot of people are dealing with that today. And I'm a natural optimist. That's just the way I prefer to live my life. I will learn from my experiences and try not to do the wrong thing more than once. But I really said, this is the place for me. This is where I think I want to go. And I think for a lot of people, even today, this is where they're having to rethink. When you talked about those industries that are hard hit, there are some very, very smart people in those industries. There's some very talented people in those industries, and they may decide to step out and do something a little bit differently.
Either by necessity or they see the opportunity, they're making the shift. And we've all heard about, the gig economy. We've all seen how, people in their 40s, 50s, early 60s, maybe they found themselves out of a corporate job. Maybe they faced a scenario like you did where a company was moving and they weren't moving with them. And so now there's a crisis of career, or there's a crisis maybe even of identity, of like, am I a business owner? Could I do this? Could I go after this? What do you see happen? Do you see a lot of people trying to start businesses after all of this?
I don't know if I would say a lot. I mean, there will be people that say, hey, I want to go start a business. There will be people that say, I want to move into a new area, a new space. There are industries that are burgeoning and growing today under the grocery industry, the home delivery industry, medical supplies, medical services, legal supplies, legal services. Everything's going to be turned upside down with this crisis because of the amount of massive upheaval that we've got. So you're going to see a bunch of people that do that. The real challenge in any of this decision-making process is, first they got to say, hey, is this the right place for me? Is this the right person for me? Is this the right product? Is this the right service? But the biggest challenge is belief in themselves. Do they believe that they can actually do this? And this is where coaching really plays a huge role, because I've coached lots of people and they all like, oh, I can't do that. You can do that. Can't. The reality is people are capable of a lot more than they ever thought they were. And it helps to have somebody give you sort of that encouragement and that guidance. Maybe cut off some of the errors and the mistakes, because anytime you're learning something new, you're gonna make some mistakes. But somebody that's in your corner that says, hey, you can do it. Yep. You can make it happen. Because I think that's the biggest issue, belief in themselves.
Yep. So that's kind of for the would-be entrepreneur. What about for the seasoned executive or the person that's already decided, hey, I've been an entrepreneur for a while, but I need some help. Something's not working. What are some of those signs? What are some of those signs of when somebody could benefit from a coach? Maybe they're getting stuck in their own mindset. Where do you start to see that show up, and what's the approach to kind of overcome some of those challenges?
So the first question is, where do you start to see that show up? Anytime, and this happens to anybody, anytime where uncertainty starts to show up, like where you're not sure what to do or where to go or how to resolve or how to, there's just a lack of clarity. That's a place where some additional advisor or additional resources would be really valuable, whether it's a coach or health nutritionist, whatever. There are coaches and advisors all over the place for that. The other one is wherever you're getting frustrated, you're unhappy with whatever results you're getting. Now, the reality is it's not the first time you get frustrated, because we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to learn from those mistakes. As long as we're learning, we're going to get to some level of proficiency. But where we see the same thing again and again and again, I've tried it 2 or 3 times, it's still not working, right? That's the time where you need to step back and say, okay, I got to do something a little bit different. Yep. Because continuing down that frustrating path is it's not a win situation.
Yep.
And getting some additional resources is the fastest way, whether, again, like say it's a coach or something else, is the fastest way to get through that block, get through that barrier.
Yep. I was watching a video just earlier this morning about another coach of sorts who was talking about how we can often get stuck in these binary sort of black and white scenarios where it's like, well, are we going to do A or are we going to do B? And he was encouraging us to ask the question, what are we missing? What are we not seeing? Which is kind of a funny way of looking at it in some sense, because how do you know what you're not seeing? It's sort of a self-defeating statement. But I think the exercise of asking yourself that question, what am I missing? And I think some of that has to do with the limitations of our own subjectivity, right? How does coaching help bring some of that objectivity in? And expand the possibilities.
So if we're working together
Yeah.
and you say, hey, I think I could do A or I could do B.
Yeah.
And then I say, well, are there any other options? Because I think, rarely are there just 2 options.
Yeah.
There's always one option, which is stay the same. That never changes.
Right.
That has consequences.
Yep.
Then there's the option that we think would, what we want. And then the question is, what are the other options? And if you come back and you say, well, I don't know, I can't think of anybody, then we have to turn the question and say, all right, so who can we ask? Who can we ask? It might not be me. Maybe it's somebody outside of that. Maybe it's another expert. Who should we reach out to and talk to? Where can we do some research? Should we go Dr. Google, which has everything in it, right? Can we do some research on that space? Can we get some things there? Because there is rarely a binary solution. There's rarely an A or a B. There's always this gray space, and the question is how well we navigate that gray space.
Yeah.
And how well do we course correct while we're in that space? We're trying to get to point B, but there is no straight line. It doesn't work that way, and we have to figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I even recently just have found myself pleasantly surprised by a third option that was available to me, because option A didn't sound great, option B didn't sound great, and now you're in this kind of analysis paralysis conundrum. One of the things you mentioned was, you're an optimist, and I think right now, in this era, this season of time that we're in right now, however long it lasts. It's hard for some people to be optimistic, and we can get into a mental space of being defeated or just feeling beaten down. And I don't know all of the clients that you work with, but tell us a little bit about getting mentally ready, getting mentally geared up, kind of getting your mind and your heart engaged in the direction that you want to go. Do you have disciplines for that? Does that just come naturally to you? And maybe for people that you work with where it doesn't come naturally, like, is there a process you go through? Are there affirmations that you recommend for people? Like, how do you keep that positivity so that you're moving forward and not stuck?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I am an optimist, but I'm also a big fan of process. Because I think when we take decision making out of it and we just execute the process, we can get better results. So I'll just share my process. So I have a morning routine that I go through. Okay. I get up in the morning. First thing I do is I make a pot of coffee or half a pot of coffee, and then I journal. I write, and I write down all the things that just pop into my head. And then I start to write down, and usually as that's happening, some of the things that I want to do today are going to pop up, and some of the new ideas are going to pop up. And then I move from that into sort of a place of prayer. For me, that's a really important component, because, I ask God to help me, give me some wisdom and give me some guidance and give me what I need today to serve as effectively as I can serve today. Yeah. Affirmations, I have some of my own, but here's what I've done in the past is I Dr. Google, right? Go Google the top affirmations, right? Because I can't tell you which ones are best for you. Right. I don't know the answer to that question. Right. And I was doing this the other day. And by the way, I do the exact same things I tell my clients to do. And I came up with a list of 35 really quickly. It took me 20 seconds to find this list. And as I went down there were 7 of them that I thought were just really, really important and helped just shift my mindset.
Yeah. How relatively important is that going into your day? I mean, in my mind, it's super important how we show up, right? We can show up as the optimist or we can show up as the defeatist. How's that going to impact all of the tough decisions that business owners have to make?
There is nothing more important, right? There is nothing more important than getting your head in the right place for performance on a daily basis. Whatever it takes. And for me, it's about an hour in the morning.
Because journaling is not on the top list of the most productive things, the way we typically think of that, right? Like we're not looking at the P&L at that moment. We're not checking email. We're not with our leaders that are our team. We're by ourselves getting this stuff out on paper, and it doesn't look very productive. But what I hear you saying is that it's instrumental to your process in getting your head in the right space.
Absolutely. This is 100% my process, is getting my head in the right place to be the best I can be for that day. So 1 hour before I get started, don't read emails, don't answer the phone, don't do anything. I sit in my chair, I sip some coffee, and I write. And I just journal. And it's all about getting my head in the right place for the rest of the day. The other thing I would recommend is that in the evening, late day, you start to begin a little bit of a prioritization process for what's coming up tomorrow, right? What's important, because there's some amazing things that happen when you sleep. There's a percolation model that says that where, if you just plant a couple of seeds the day before and say, tomorrow I need to work on this and I need to do that, and then you go to sleep. Right? Now, first off, you haven't forgotten it. You know what's going on. It'll actually help you sleep a little better. Second thing is that your subconscious starts to kick that stuff around, and you'll be surprised what you come up with in the morning. It's like, oh, I know how to do that, right? Because so much of what we're doing, especially if you're in the leadership space, if you're running your own business, you're moving into places you've never been before. And as a leader, maybe you've got people that you're leading into places they've never been before. And if you've never been there before, it's kind of hard there is no path. And so those ideas, those aha moments, and we've talked about those, lots of people talk about those, we have to give them an opportunity to show up.
Give them some space.
Yeah. And that place where you just 2 or 3 things, and this is a 3-minute exercise at the end of the day that says, hey, I need to work on these 2 things tomorrow. That'll help. That percolation thing is amazing.
Yeah, very cool. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a minute with more with John Whitt.
From a very young age, I remember in 6th grade being taught in sex education that an abortion is just a woman's choice, and that's it. That's the only thing they teach you. It's not a baby. It's part of the woman's body, and she gets to decide whether it lives or dies. I grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, in a very Catholic and supportive family.
My husband and I, Jerry, have 5 children. Veronica is the youngest. And I always told her, I know God has great plans for you. I had always told her that. In high school and even junior high, she had lots of struggles with anxiety and depression and problems in school.
I would just not want to get out of bed. I had no motivation to do schoolwork or be around family or friends. I kind of secluded myself in my room. It was Christmas Day of 2018. I was 16 years old. My boyfriend was 18 at the time. We had been dating for about 4 months. I felt that something was off with me, so I looked up some symptoms online and it was matching up with pregnancy. I went to the store to get the pregnancy tests, went home, I took one, and almost immediately the second line came up, which means that you're pregnant. I was just in disbelief at first. I was like, no way, I'm not pregnant, not me. A couple hours later, I took another one and also was positive. I have a very close relationship with my mother, so I decided to tell her first. I went up to her and I showed her the tests, and she had already had a feeling that I was pregnant because I was acting differently than I usually do.
I was a little bit shocked, but I knew that I would support her. You definitely have always been pro-life, and I knew without a doubt I would never want Veronica to have an abortion.
My boyfriend told me he wanted me to have an abortion. His first reaction was just that he was very afraid. I understood where he was coming from because I was afraid as well. I knew that he wanted me to have an abortion, and I felt pressured to do so just because I didn't want to ruin his life or alter his life in a big way when it's not something that he wanted. I actually went down to Planned Parenthood. I was put in a room with this woman, and instead of her talking to me about my options or resources or different ways I could get help, it felt like she was a salesperson and she was trying to sell me on abortion. That just didn't sit right with me, and I knew that that wasn't the place I needed to be, and that's when I went home and did my own research. I searched on YouTube, what is an abortion, and I came across Live Action's video where the doctor describes in detail at each stage of pregnancy how the baby is killed. I just felt so upset and sad after I saw that video. I just cried. I knew if I hadn't found that video, that might have been my son who was being described in the abortion procedures, and I might have gone through with something without knowing what I was truly doing. I knew that he was a person, and that he was alive, and that killing him at any stage of life would be wrong.
The truth is powerful, and I'm so glad she came across that.
My boyfriend saw that video also, and it moved us both, and we knew that we couldn't do that. My baby was over 9 pounds, so I had to have a C-section. They brought me in, and it was about a 30-minute process. The moment I heard him cry, I was just like, I couldn't believe it, and I was so emotional because it felt like it was a blessing that he was there, and I could have almost taken his life away, and I was just so happy to hear his voice. That's a moment I'll never forget, and I just feel blessed to be his mom. I think a lot of women do choose abortion because they're afraid of the lack of support, and also I think they're just uneducated and not completely aware of what they're doing. Your pregnancy isn't just a blob of cells, it is a human being, and it deserves to live. Don't be afraid. There's so many resources out there that can help you if you are pregnant. I had my boyfriend there with me. He's been a great dad. He's really stepped up. I've been helped by people who I didn't even know existed. I'm really thankful that I found that video and that I found the resources I did and that I have my son. He really saved my life.
Welcome back to the show. I've been here talking with John Whitt. We've been talking about opportunities in crisis, and mainly in the context of the business environment for entrepreneurs and executives during this COVID crisis and all of the challenges that it's presented. John, I read a quote, it's in one of my journals, speaking of journaling, something to the effect of, if dreams only work if you work. And there's a whole personal element to being a leader. We have to bring kind of our best mindset, like we were talking about, our best selves. We have to show up in a certain way. And while we were offline for the minute there, you were just beginning to share with me about how you're beginning to kind of face some rethinking and some retooling and some relaunching for you personally. Wondering if you'd be willing to dive into that at all.
Sure. Happy to. It's interesting because I don't teach, coach anything that I haven't already learned, tested, believed in, am doing. And if you step back to crisis, right? This isn't the first crisis we've all been through, and it's not the last one.
Yep.
And I told you earlier that the last crisis, the Great Recession, is what pushed me into creating this business, this opportunity. And so for many people today, they're dealing with COVID-19. Now, me, I'm actually going through an additional crisis that started before COVID-19, in the sense that my wife decided that she didn't want to be married anymore in January, and so I never thought I was going to be single at 60. And so that's kind of an interesting place. And in terms of crisis, it's like, okay, I knew in 2019 what my future was going to look like.
Right.
And here I am at 2020, and I don't have a lot of clarity in that particular space. What does that look like? Where do you really want to go? What do you really want to do? Now, the reality is this is my second divorce, and so I'm much smarter. It's going to be a lot easier. There's still pain associated with splitting up, but sure. I don't have kids. I don't have all that other kind of stuff. And that also lends itself to like this level of freedom that I'm not even certain I know what to do with, because I could go anywhere. I could do anything. I had somebody say they just came back from Hawaii, and I turned around and I said to myself, if you wanted to go to Hawaii, this is before COVID-19. I said, if you want to go to Hawaii, you could go tomorrow. Yeah. Right. I don't have to get somebody else involved. It's right. When there's only one of you, it's the decision-making process is a lot easier.
A little simpler.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I'm really sitting there saying, okay, so how do we turn around and leverage? Okay, now I'm talking about opportunities in crisis. How do I turn around and leverage this thing? I know I have pain and I have some grief and I have to get through that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not belittling that or saying that that's not important. Yeah. But at the same time, if you're an optimist like me, when one door closes, another one opens, and I'm trying to figure out what that door is that's going to open. And so for me, one of the things I've wanted to do for a long time is traveling, right? And I'm a golfer. That's one of the things I do for fun. And I would love to, one of the dreams I had was to get an RV, take a month off, travel to the Northwest, I have family up there, and just go visit golf courses. And that came back to me, and I don't remember exactly where it did. I just said, hey, listen, I've just met a client that does van conversions, right? So the Sprinter van conversions, there's a lot of different models out there. Sure. But I'm like, I could do that. I could take my coaching business on the road because I do most of my coaching I do all of my coaching today on Zoom. Yep. There is no one-on-one, and that can continue. And I could do that from anywhere there's an internet connection. And I could literally just go on the road and take my coaching activity on the road. But then I could also, in addition to that, start this Single at 60 blog thing that I'm thinking about, because I actually went on the internet. Okay, so I'm an internet fan. Dr. Google and I are big fans. And I said, Single at 60. And what came up? Well, there's a bunch of things about women and where they're at when they're 60. Guess how many things I found about men?
Probably not a lot.
Actually, none.
Okay.
Zero. Absolutely zero. There were things.
Men aren't journaling their thoughts and feelings out on the internet?
I don't think so. No. I don't know. And this is something I've been working on. So even when for my business, I publish a weekly video, and, I kind of get into who I am and what's important and what's valuable. My relationship with God is really important to me. And that's actually a new thing for me. It didn't start until I turned 50, where I really became engaged and figured out how that worked out for me. And so I've learned to write and to do videos and things like that. And I thought, okay, this Single at 60 thing, and if I was on the road and I was kind of leveraging my Single at 60-ness, would that be valuable? Could I publish some content? Would that be kind of fun? So I'm actually going to start this new blog. Cool. I'll have a link for people to register if they're interested in getting it. This is not something I'm just going to send out to everybody. Sure. If you're interested, you can have it. I'll get it to you. Yeah. There'll be some videos. I literally moved out of my office this last weekend. Okay. I don't need an office, right? Nobody needs an office right now. Right. Right. And so I have this opportunity.
Much to the commercial real estate industry chagrin right now, right?
That's going to be another industry that's going to have to wrestle with this issue. And that's also where the attorneys are going to get involved. Sure. Because you're talking big money in that case.
People getting out of leases and all that. Yep.
So I'm going into this, I'm leaning into a minimalist space. I don't need a lot. Yeah. I don't want a lot. Yeah. I'm much more interested in experiences than materialistic things at this point.
So let me just pause for a second, because what I hear you saying and what I hear that you've done is, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but there's a silver lining that I think, a lens that I think that you have as an optimist, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of what an optimist does. And the realists and the pessimists kind of hate you guys for it, but because they want you to just enter deeply into their pain with them, right? And so, but you have this lens that allows you to pivot pretty quickly from, oh shoot, something bad is happening or has just happened, COVID, divorce, fill in the blank, to wow, there's something new out there, and actually, when something dies, something new can come to life. And so I think people like me that are a little bit more on the realist or the pessimist side need people like you in our lives, because you pull us out of that mire, right out of that depression. And I've enjoyed our dialogue with that. But I just hear a lot of optimism and a lot of like, hey, this is kind of a cool opportunity to see what's next. And it sounds like there's probably an analog there with business as well.
I think so. I think there's an analog in the sense that this willingness to explore, to look for new ideas. And I think it's super important today in COVID-19 to get out of your comfort zone, to get into a space where I can experience some other things and to learn from those things and then begin to apply those things. Because I have no idea, what's going to come out of this for me, but I believe there will be lots of interesting things that come out of it. And I'll learn some things and I'll grow and I'll share these things with my audience, whether they're my business owner clients or they're just people that are interested in the new blog. I think that's a value proposition for many. In the corporate world, the big issue is risk. Yeah. Right? They don't like taking risk, and because that could be career shortening, right? Career effective. In the small business world, the issue is fear. So in the executive world, one of the reasons why I like or dislike it, they have the revenue, they have the power, they have the resources to actually make things happen. Right. But because they can be so risk averse, they actually don't get anything done. And those frustrate me.
Sure.
In the small business world, every dollar that they spend or every dollar that they make goes right into their bottom line pocket. But along with that is this huge fear. So we don't see the fear on the executive, we see the fear on the small business owner. On the executive, what we don't see, because they're going to get their paycheck, they're going to go on vacation, sure. They're going to get it. And they need to understand how to overcome the uber risk management model, right, so that they can lead their team to new and better places. But no matter what, when you're going places that you haven't been before, you have to be willing to go out and explore. So I'm doing the same thing.
Yep. I saw a TED Talk that talked about how comfort will kill you, something to that effect. And I'm forgetting the name. We'll put it in the show notes and link it. But basically the TED Talker, and I believe he's an author, was talking about the circles of complexity, and that's where growth happens. And that when we stay in our comfort zones, the status quo, and nothing really changes. And actually there's a risk. We don't want to think about this, but there's actually a risk in just sitting comfortable in that status quo, because your competitor is going to be innovating at that very moment. It's the next Steve Jobs in the garage, or Jeff Bezos in the garage, building something that the IBMs of the world don't understand yet, right? And so all of a sudden you're disrupted, and you didn't even know it was coming.
Well, I think the one of the things that's really important to understand in this model of being in this comfort zone is, yes, you've got competitors that are going to be potentially coming up with new innovation and stealing your lunch.
Yep.
But that comfort zone also has this propensity to have us live life at a level far below our potential.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When we move above security and food, clothing, and shelter into achievement and self-esteem and fulfillment, actualization. How do I fulfill why I'm really here? Yeah. Right? How do I make the biggest impact? Not just survive, not be comfortable, but how do I make this thing really work?
Yeah.
And you're not going to get there in the comfort zone.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the entrepreneurial spirit and what drives the type of personality that of the person that becomes the entrepreneur is naturally curious about what can I accomplish? What can I do? Hey, this is working. This is fun. This is cool. Let's do more of it. And then you see the serial entrepreneurs that, just can't get enough, and they had their exit and they made their money and they're just going to go do it again, not because they need the money, but because they enjoy the thrill and they enjoy building something and they enjoy, fulfilling that potential, kind of that idea of manifest destiny of the self, and that self-actualization.
It's about loving the journey.
Yeah.
Right? Because the end is just, it's the end. It's time to start something new.
Right.
The journey is where they want to, and creating and building is really where they live. Mm-hmm. That's their thing.
Well, we're going to wrap up here, but I just want to give our listeners and our audience an opportunity to get involved with what you're doing, to connect with you. How can our audience learn more about what you're doing? Check out your content, because you're producing a good amount of content these days and getting a lot of help in their entrepreneurial journey. How can they get a hold of you?
So, I have a website just like everybody else. Well, most people, www.businesswhitt.com. And, I've got lots of material and content there. Also active on Facebook under Business Whitt, YouTube under Business Whitt.
2 T's, right?
2 T's, WHITT.
Yep.
LinkedIn is Coach John Whitt. Have an Instagram channel. So just about anywhere on social media, if you search for Business Whitt or John Whitt or Coach John Whitt, you'll find me. If you're interested in just kind of finding out what coaching would work for you, then there is an application on my website. You can get access to my calendar and you can apply for a call with me. And if you've got the right stuff, I'm more than willing to spend some time there. And I don't work with everybody because it doesn't work that way. But those people that are interested, have energy and motivation, and I've got a whole list of classifications that you can help me with on your application. Then we'll have a conversation. We'll find out if it makes some sense. We can definitely make a difference for anybody that I have a conversation with, identifying, sort of where they're going and what's really important and what's in their way and what do they have to get out. We will make that happen in any call that we do there. But you can certainly reach out and do a call there. Or soon, if you're interested, my email address, john@businesswhitt.com, is business and then WHITT. If you're interested in that blog that we talked about for Single at 60, send me an email. I'll make sure that you get a link. Yeah. I'll have something coming up here in the next week or so that people can sign up for. But that's only if you want it. That's not going to go out to the world's population.
And I'll just just give you a quick plug, John. I've really enjoyed working with you. I think for me, the benefit of a coach has been getting outside of my system, having a layer of objectivity, getting outside of my own head. And obviously you're 60, I'm 40, in my 40s, so a couple more decades than me of experience, skill, mistakes, learnings, lessons learned. And so I just have appreciated your perspective and your help, and appreciate you being on the show.
Well, thank you. You are a great client. I just love the energy, the attitude, the willingness. You're not one that's going to take everything at face value. We're going to kick it through and make sure it really works, but it's been real successful.
Cool. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us today, and please be sure to join us next time as we get into an interview with another business leader so that we can help your company grow and take your company to new heights. I hope you enjoyed my interview with John and our discussion about rethinking, retooling, and relaunching our businesses in light of COVID-19. Join us next time for episode 3, where I talk with leadership giant and a luminary when it comes to corporate social responsibility, Charles Antis. We'll see you then.